So now we get to combine everything we've learned from our compositing skills earlier in the class with our knowledge of text. To do this, we're going to create what's called a photo quote. We've all seen them. It's that kind of cheesy poster in a doctor's waiting room that says, "Hang in there," and it's got a picture of a kitten hanging by a limb. They're cheesy, but they're a good exercise in making text exist with an image and using font and spacing and size to communicate the essence of your image. So on Canvas, I've given you guys files to use for this exercise. Go ahead and download those now. 2 of those files are text files. And so I want you guys to figure out how to install those on your computer. It's a great thing to know. If you're on a PC, it's really easy. You right-click on it and you hit install. If you're on a Mac, it's fairly easy as well. You just drag that file to your font book application. So go ahead and install those fonts now, unpack that zip file, and then join me in Photoshop. So for this exercise, we are going to start with a regular WebLarge preset, but we're going to change the settings over here to be 2000 pixels wide and 3000 pixels tall. And we're going to change the resolution to be 96. That way it's print ready. 2000 by 3000, 96 pixels per inch. Let's go ahead and hit create. So here's our poster-sized artboard. Now let's go ahead and open up all the images that I've given you inside of that zip folder. Now to start, we want to get our background image into our new poster artboard. We're going to use this road background as kind of the foundation for our photo quote poster, and then we're going to add all the other images to it. So let's go ahead and start with our road background. Let's select all, copy, and then paste it inside of our new Untitled 1 artboard. I'm going to hit Control A or Command, Control C to copy, then jump on over to Untitled 1 artboard and hit Control V to paste, or Command V if you're on a Mac. Now I'm going to enter free transform because notice the image is bigger than our artboard, which is a great problem to have. The keyboard shortcut for free transform is Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac. And then I'm going to scale this down, not holding Shift because we want to scale it proportionally, just until it fits inside of this window. And then I'll hit Enter to apply. So that's my foundation image. Obviously we're going to change a lot about this, but let's go ahead and start to get our text in there. Now I'm going to get out my type tool, and I'm going to click on my artboard. That creates a brand new text layer called Layer 2, and it's already for me in the Javanese text font that I've given you guys. So if you haven't installed that, do that now, and then change your text to be the Javanese text font. In all caps, I'm going to type a journey. A journey. Now it's too large. I'm going to hit Control A or Command A, and I'm going to start to change the size of my text. Now, since we've learned about the character panel in this unit, I'm going to use the character panel for most of my changes and leave the option bar alone. So I'm going to use my big T little t as a slider and change this text to be a bit smaller. I'm going to grab it and move it just so I can see what's happening. That looks okay for now, so let's keep going. Let's get our text tool out again. Let's click on our artboard. I'm going to type lies. Not like I'm lying to you, but like something lies over there. And I'm going to use my text slider again to change the size to be bigger. Now, because we want things to be proportional and to live together, I want the boundaries of lies on the L and the S to be within my A and my Y on journey. And so to do this, I'm just going to start to shrink this text down a little bit until it starts to match the size of the text above it. Now this is important because if we just start to not pay attention to the size of our text, then our communication efforts are going to be thwarted. And that's not at all what we want to do. That looks pretty good right around 235. And now I'm going to get my text tool out again. I'm going to click in my artboard and I'm going to type beyond, but not in all caps. Now I want Beyond to be in that other font that I gave you guys, the Surfing Capital. I'm going to double click my T, and I'm going to change my text to be the Surfing Capital font. Now you can search inside of Photoshop. There it is. Click. Now I want this to be tracked a bit closer. I don't want the characters this far apart. So under my tracking pull down, I'm going to start this at 0, which is technically the default for the font. That looks okay to me. Now I'm going to make the text bigger. Right until it kind of fills the boundary of the artboard. I'm going to drag this up a little bit. Okay, I think maybe a journey and lies need to be just a little bit higher to make room for Beyond to come up just a little bit more. Good. All right, it's looking pretty cool. Let's now start to work with the text integration into our image, into our background. Now notice here we have kind of a cool opportunity to make the N and the D of Beyond disappear behind this hill. And this will start to make the text feel more integrated into our overall image. So to do this, we're going to use Select and Mask. Let's go and select our background image, our Layer 1 road image. And we're going to enter the Select and Mask interface. Again, to do that, you can select any of our original selection tools, and then come up to the option bar and hit Select and Mask. Now, if you want to change your view to mine here, you just change this view pull down to the far right to overlay, and that gives you kind of that red overlay. It's just easier to see what we're selecting. And again, we're going to be using our quick selection tool up here at the very top, and I'm simply going to paint on the part of the hill that interacts with the N and the D. Nothing more, nothing less. Now I don't want to change the output settings to a layer mask. Why? Because I want to create a selection that then I can use on my Beyond layer. We're not actually making the adjustments to the hill. We're just using the hill as a reference. So let's change our output to settings, and that's under the output settings toggle down. Let's change this to selection, and then hit OK. Now that's made the dancing ants around the hill. So let's now select our Beyond text layer. Now if I hit the new mask icon, it's going to mask out everything but what's interacting with the hill, and that's not what I want. So we have to inverse our selection. Go to Select in the menu bar, Inverse. Now that selects everything but what's being under the hill. So let's go ahead and hit our new mask icon. And now it kind of eats away what was inside of that selection. And now the Beyond is interacting with that hill in kind of a really cool way. Now, something I like to do to make text appear a bit more integrated into my image is when something's disappearing behind a hill, I kind of like to give it a slight gradient to make it seem like it's interacting more than just a hard line around the hill. Now, we already have a mask on our Beyond layer, and that's good. And we can continue to add to that mask by using our paintbrush and black and white. Now, if I'm using a really soft and rather large brush with black as my foreground color, watch what I can do. And changing the size with the square bracket keys, I can kind of start to eat away at the text that's interacting with the mountain in a way that just kind of gives it more atmosphere. Kind of starts to feel a bit more integrated. Now, I like the word lies, but I want to make it feel a bit more integrated into my sky. So I'm going to select my lies text layer, and I'm going to simply add a blank layer mask. Now again, a blank layer mask does nothing by default, but now if we come over to our paint bucket tool, click and hold or simply right click, and let's select our gradient tool. We've talked about the gradient tool a little bit in the past, but the gradient tool is going to allow us to add just a slight feathered gradient to the word lies and make it feel a bit more atmospheric. Now I'm going to have this set to my regular linear gradient, And I'm going to change the mode to multiply. I'm going to click and hold shift and drag up just a little bit. You can kind of see how it starts to add a gradient to make the bottom part of lies disappear. Now I think that's too much, so I'm going to hit Control Z. I'm going to start my gradient a bit lower. Now again, the further you drag, the heavier the gradient. The less you drag, the more subtle the gradient. That looks good to me. Now, once we get our text in our image, it's completely fair game to adjust throughout this project. If there's things that you guys want to do separately, you totally can. And we're going to go back and keep kind of working with this text as we go. But getting your text just kind of laid in there to start gives you a lot of good context and ideas as you start to place other images now as a composite. So let's keep going. Now, I want to replace the sky in this image. I gave you guys a starry sky image. Go ahead and click on this tab, select all, copy, and paste it into our artboard. Now drag this layer beneath layer 1. You might be thinking, well, that makes it disappear. You're right, it does. So we want to mask out then the sky on our road layer. Now, just to be clear, I'm going to go ahead and rename my layers. I'm going to call my road layer road background. And I'm going to rename my sky layer stars. So let's select the road background. Now let's re-enter select and mask. So I'm going to select any of my selection tools and come up to the option bar and click select and mask. And I now want to paint on the sky. It really should be quite easy. Now our output settings currently say selection from our previous select and mask. We want to change this to layer mask, but this time we want to invert our mask instead. Invert my layer mask. And now hit OK. All right, we're looking good. So now we have a mask that's taken out the sky of our road layer, and now our stars are appearing behind. Now I'm going to select my stars layer, hit Control T to enter free transform. You can see that the stars are really quite large. I'm going to scale this down and then drag it up until I start to see kind of that really nice kind of caramel color of the stars down low. And I'm going to hit enter. Now this combination is not fooling anybody. The kind of grayed out, washed out look of our mountains here in the middle does not mesh well with the high contrast of the stars. And this is where we're going to have to get creative with a gradient to make this work. Now, it's a truth about skies that they get a little bit lighter toward the horizon due to light pollution and whatnot. So if we add a blank layer mask to our stars layer, get out our gradient tool, keep the settings as they were before, and then do a really subtle gradient toward the bottom. That starts to look a whole lot better, a lot more natural at the very least. Now I'm starting to lose my word beyond. The font that I gave you guys here, it consists of a bunch of little holes. It's a really cool font. I like using this font a lot. I'm going to duplicate beyond just to kind of make it extra firm in how it looks. So just grab beyond and drag it to that new layer icon at the bottom. That's just going to kind of thicken those dots to make it not appear as transparent. Looking good. We'll continue with color correction a little bit later, but let's go ahead and get our other images in here. Let's start with our air balloon. Go to your air balloons tab, and we're just going to select and mask out this front hot air balloon. So again, let's enter select and mask. Let's paint on the balloon. Now, because the balloon's red and our overlay view is red, it's kind of hard to tell what we've selected and what we haven't. You can always change the color of your overlay view by clicking this little color square. So green, I think, is a lot easier now to see what we have and have not selected. It's kind of a nice trick. So using your quick selection tool, paint on everything that is part of the balloon, including the basket. And then we're going to use our refine edge brush to kind of refine and paint on the strings and the kind of fine edges of that upper part of the basket. Layer mask is fine. We don't want to invert anything this time because that would not select the balloon. And then let's go ahead and hit OK. Perfect, there's our balloon. Now, as we remember from our previous Snowy Castle composite, we can't now just select all, copy, and paste this. Why? Because it has a mask applied. So we could right-click and duplicate, if you guys remember doing this, and then sending it to our new Untitled 1 artboard. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And that sends it over to our working artboard. Now the balloon's much too large, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-T to enter free transform, and I'm going to scale this down. Just big enough to kind of cover the upper part of that E and Y. Good. We'll work on the integration of that a little bit later. Let's just continue though. Let's go to our moon. Let's select all, copy, and let's paste our moon into our Untitled 1 artboard. I'm going to enter free transform and scale this down just a little bit until the entire thing fits in my artboard. Now, you would not be wrong to say that we should screen this. And again, using the layer blending modes here where it says normal, if we change this to screen, it takes out anything that's black and leaves anything with color. But the issue is it makes it really quite transparent. And when you look at the moon in the sky, you can't see stars through it. So it kind of starts to ruin the realism there. So let's go ahead and instead keep this on normal. And let's enter select and mask for our moon. Now I'm going to simply select the moon itself. If it starts to grab the black, you can change to the minus in the option bar and start to paint off the black. Now let's use our refine edge brush, make it a little bit bigger here. And I'm going to refine the edge of the dark side of the moon. And again, all this is doing is making it semi-transparent, trying to get these craters in there too. Layer mask is fine. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And you can see how it starts to feather the dark edges of the moon, which is great, but it keeps solid the moon itself. Let's now enter free transform. Let's scale the moon down. Let's get the moon inside of our sky. Now for composition's sake, I kind of want to make the moon mirror the size of the balloon. To scale from center, I'm actually holding Alt or Option on a Mac. This helps scale from center as opposed to scaling from corner. I'm going to make that roughly the size of the balloon and then bring that up into my sky right where the Y ends on journey. Now I want this to live behind my text, so I'm going to take my moon and I'm going to drag it beneath journey, that way the Y overlaps with moon. So now I've got everything placed, but now we got to start working on integration. So let's start with our balloon. Two things I want to do here. I want to change the color of the balloon a little bit, and I want to make the E and the Y interact with the balloon a little bit more. So let's start with the color. On our balloon layer, which I'm now going to rename balloon, I'm going to come up to Image, Adjustments, Color Balance. And again, by using Image Adjustments, we are applying this to only the balloon layer. I'm going to make this a bit more cyan, or a bit more cyan, a bit more blue, and a bit in the green. You can see how that's really just kind of taking off that oversaturated edge and giving it a lot more of that cyan. Same thing with the shadows. I'm just going to add a bit more cyan and a bit more blue. The blue in the shadows is really going to help bring that forward. I'm going to leave my highlights well enough alone, and I'm going to hit OK. Better. Now, because this balloon was such a high resolution image, When you bring a high resolution image into a composite, the edges can tend to look sharper than it should if this were an actual photograph. So it feels kind of weird, but we're actually going to blur the balloon a little bit. To do this, we're going to come up to Filter in the menu bar. We're going to go down to our Blur Effect side menu, and we're going to add what's called a Gaussian blur. Now, a Gaussian blur just starts to affect how blurry the object is. This is great if you're kind of trying to create a fake depth of field. I don't want this to be super blurry at all because the photo is actually quite sharp, but at 0, it's too sharp. So let's go ahead and add like a 0.5 pixel radius. That's just enough, maybe even like 0.7. That's just enough to take off that kind of sharp edge. Hit OK. That's kind of a nice tip and trick for composites. Adding a slight blur can really make things feel more integrated. And now, just like we did with the N and the D on Beyond by the hill, I want to kind of remove some of the E and the Y around the balloon to give it some more atmosphere. To do this, I'm going to get out my brush, keep black, come down to my Beyond. Now I have 2 Beyonds now, so we're going to have to actually do this on both of these masks. Let's start with our top. I'm just going to kind of click around the edges that are interacting with the balloon. Now again, you're not going to see much of a difference at all because we have the text behind it as well. If I were to hide my bottom Beyond, you can see it's eating away from that a lot more. So now we're going to do this on our lower Beyond as well, but just slightly less. I'm going to increase the size of my brush. You can see what this is doing. I might have gone a little too much on the Y there. Just switch to white and I can bring some of that back. I've always kind of liked the way it makes the balloon pop out and stand out a bit more from the text. That looks pretty well integrated. We could do it to the L on lies as well. If I select my mask on lies and select black as my foreground color, I can kind of start to get a little bit more of that L, even the I, eaten away just a little bit more. Good. Now let's go up to our moon. Let's go up to our moon. I'm going to rename my moon layer Moon. Let's go ahead and use image adjustments, color balance, to change the color of the moon. And the moon is kind of a washed out gray. We want to make it a lot more blue and a bit more purpley. And you can see how this really starts to integrate the moon into the background a lot more. I'm going to hit OK. Now the moon still doesn't feel right. I want to add a slight glow around the moon, an outer glow. And again, to do this, we're going to use Layer Styles. To access the Layer Styles menu, if you recall, you double click on the far right of the gray area of that layer. I'm going to come over to Outer Glow. Select the actual word, not just the checkbox. And go ahead and match my settings here. I added this glow earlier from my previous example, but if we add this glow here, it's going to really kind of start to make this feel a bit more like it's emitting something. So screen, the opacity is set to 58. We'll keep our color at kind of a nice pale blue. There's our hex number if you want to keep that. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now let's start working with the color correction of the overall image. I'm going to go down to my stars layer and I want to saturate this just a little bit. Again, using image adjustments, hue and saturation. I'm going to increase the saturation for this, around 35. And then I'm going to bring my hue slider a little bit to make this a bit more on the teal side. Going to hit OK. Now the moon is still much too intense. I'm going to select my moon layer. I'm going to reduce the opacity just a bit, maybe down to like 85%. And then I'm going to start to play with the mask on the moon. Not the man on the moon, the mask on the moon. Using a large black brush, I'm going to start to feather off some of these edges on the moon. If you go too much, you can always just switch to white and bring it back, being careful not to bring the black outside back like that. I'm going to change the opacity just a little bit more. Bring it up just a hair. And then I'm going to apply our Gaussian blur to the moon. That starts to look a little bit better. We could play with blending modes too if we wanted. Screen does make it look a bit more integrated, but again, we can see the stars behind it. If that doesn't bother you, then you can kind of keep it. I like it like that. Even make it a little brighter. You could probably play with layering things to try to take those stars out, but I'm just going to keep it for now. So let's now work with adjustment layers to change the overall look and feel of our image. I'm going to select my very top layer. In my case, it's the balloon. I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. I'm going to start with Hue and Saturation. Now, the entirety of my image is a bit flat to me. I'm going to increase the saturation a little bit to make it a bit more fantastical in its saturation. I'm going to minus my hue, just like 5 or 6, to add a bit more of that teal and orange look. I'm going to go back to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. I'm going to do some curves. And again, I'm going to create my S-curve here. And the S-curve by default is probably going to be a bit too much. But again, I can use my opacity slider to change how much of that is actually applied. So I'm going to go right around 50%. And now I'm going to come down to my road background, and I'm going to change the colors of just the road background. I'm going to go to Image, Adjustment, Color Balance. And just like everything else, I'm going to add a bit more of that cyan and blue. Hit OK. Now I've given you guys a light leak. Let's go ahead and select all. Let's copy and let's paste this light leak into our artboard. Now you'll notice that it's much too small, and that's okay because we're going to end up adding a blur to this anyway, so we won't see the distortion of pixels. But let's enter Free Transform, Control-T or Command-T, and let's rotate this way. And then I'm going to hold Alt or Option and scale this up to fit and hit Enter to apply. I want this light leak to be at the very top of my image. So I'm going to drag this light leak in my layer panel all the way to the top. And I'm going to select Screen from my blending mode pull down. Now this makes it look like there's a lot of light coming from the left side, but really I want the moon to be kind of emanating that light. So we want to flip this on a horizontal plane. If you guys remember, we go up to Edit in the menu bar. Come down to Transform, not Free Transform, just the Transform side menu, and then hit Flip Horizontal. That's better, but now it kind of just engulfs the entirety of our moon, and we start to lose the effect. So I'm going to add a blank layer mask to my light leak. And I'm going to use a gradient, actually several gradients, to kind of reduce the intensity of this light leak. So now it's just kind of softening the center part of my image. And because our mode is set to multiply for the gradient tool, we can make as many gradients as we want. Now I want this light leak to not be orange, but rather to be kind of that teal cyan color we've been going for. So for my light leak layer, I'm going to come up to Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. I'm just going to pull my hue slider until this starts to kind of give me that teal purple look. I think that looks pretty good. Could even saturate it a bit more if you wanted it to look a little more fantastical, and hit OK. Now this looks pretty cool to me. And we have now text that is paired well with one another. We have the fantastical elements like the starry sky, the moon, and the balloon that make the essence of what we're saying with "a journey lies beyond" come true. And we have our good background image with a road that communicates, a journey anyway. Now I want to play real quick with the word lies. Because this is sandwiched between our beyond and a journey, I kind of want to separate this. Otherwise, we just kind of have a bunch of white text and it looks a little lame. I'm going to change the color of my text in my character panel to black. But I'm going to change the mode to overlay. And what does that do? Well, it starts to now interact with the stars behind it, giving it some separation from our other text. You guys can play with that as well, make it look a little different if you want to. But this now is a pretty good photo quote poster. If you guys want to play with other elements on this, totally feel free to do so. Change the spacing of the text, play with how the moon looks, make it your own. If you guys want to make your own photo quote, find your own images, by all means do so. Go to DeFont or Font Squirrel and find new fonts that communicate the essence of what you're trying to communicate and have fun. This is a great thing to merge, to kind of understand the world of composites and the world of text and font adjustments. So nice job on this. Go ahead and submit your files to Canvas and I'll see you in the next tutorial.